You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, welcome to Japan Needs. I'm your host Akiko Tema, a food writer and the director of the New York Japanese Culinary Academy, which promotes a deep understanding of Japanese cuisine in America. We are broadcasting live from Brooklyn, New York. This show is all about Japanese food and food culture. We see sushi at every day on the supermarket, but what is beyond sushi? We hear dashi ramen izakaya, but what exactly are they? Japanese food is still a mystery for many people, and I try to demystify it in this program with my cool guests. My guest today is Tim Anderson, who is a chef, food writer, and a broadcaster based in London. Tim's early interest in Japanese food led him to global adventures in LA, Japan, and the UK. And a bowl of ramen he encountered in LA fueled his passion for studying it and moved to Fukuoka, Japan. Then he opened his ramen restaurant in the UK after winning the popular MasterChef competition on BBC One. Now he writes and communicates his insight into various aspects of Japanese food culture. It is remarkable and inspiring to see how Tim's life unfolded into consecutive, unexpected lucky events through his interest in Japanese food. So today we'll discuss how Tim got into Japanese food, his life in Japan studying ramen and Japanese food culture, how he won the MasterChef competition with his Japanese food knowledge and skills, and his excellent books that cover a variety of topics including Nanban dishes and Hokkaido food culture and much, much more. But before you start, Japan Eats is available on the Heritage Radio Network website as well as on the iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify as a podcast. So please go to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, whichever you listen to, and subscribe to Japan Eats. And please write a review. We truly appreciate your feedback. Now let's start a conversation with Tim Anderson. Hello, Tim. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So this is exciting. You have so much to share with us. So first of all, to get to know you, where are you from and what did you eat when you grew up?
I'm from Wisconsin, a city called Racine, which is just south of Milwaukee. And I grew up eating, I guess, what was typical of that area, which was Midwestern food with a lot of influence from Germany and Scandinavia. I grew up eating bratwurst and cheese and Italian-American dishes as well. And my hometown was famous for Danish pastries. So that's the kind of general food I grew up with. Occasionally, we would have things from local restaurants that were outside of those cultures. We had some decent Mexican food in my hometown and a couple of good Chinese restaurants, but no Japanese food. Not until I was older, anyway.
Except for Japanese, you had everything else. So that's amazing. And yeah, then you moved to LA in 2002, where you studied Japanese food history at Occidental College, where Obama went. So why, and that's a secret, right? So why did you choose Japanese food history as the focus of your study?
Well, it's a good question. I didn't intend to. I was interested in Japanese food from when I was in high school, and that was mostly because of Iron Chef, which came on TV when I was about 14 or 15. And I had eaten, I'd wanted to try, I wanted to try as much Japanese food as I could growing up, but there wasn't much in Wisconsin. There was really one good restaurant in Milwaukee called Izumi's. And then I would sometimes go to Chicago to try Japanese food there. But I wanted to go to LA specifically because there was a lot more Japanese food and culture generally. But in terms of what I was studying, I went to study Japanese language and history, but I didn't realize that you even could study food until a couple years in. I think when I was a sophomore in college, I came across the book Rice's Self, which is by an anthropologist named Emiko Onuki Tierney. And that was the first time I realized that you could take food seriously and study the history and culture of it. And after that, I had some professors who encouraged me to study food. And of course, as I was studying, I was also eating. There's so much great Japanese food in LA. And I realized that back in Wisconsin, I had only scratched the surface. And everywhere I went to Japanese restaurants and Japanese neighborhoods in Los Angeles, I found new things to try and to learn about.
Interesting. But you went to college to study history or Japanese related history?
Well, I actually went. I wanted to design video games. Um, that's what I wanted to do graduating from high school. But at that time, I thought I needed to learn Japanese because most of the gaming industry was still in Japan.
うん。
I realized I wasn't really very interested in coding. That was and that was a big problem. But I was interested in Japanese history and Japanese literature and art and pop culture. So I decided to shift my focus basically and wound up. It was an Asian studies major with an emphasis on Japan. So it was sort of a little bit of history, a little bit of art history, a little bit of literature. Studied film and a lot of food, I suppose.
Mm. And interesting that timing you went to LA in 2002, that was right around Japanese food became more popular because
Mm.
outside of sushi, Debbie Chang opened a Momoku noodle bar in 2003. And it's like the beginning of whole ramen boom started. So,
Yeah.
and right. So, and I heard that in 2004, you had a life changing moment at the family run ramen shop called Daikokuya in LA. So, could you
Yeah.
tell us that experience?
Yeah, it's Daikokuya. It still makes my mouth water when I think about it. I I went to Little Tokyo all the time in LA. You know, I was there almost every weekend buying ingredients and shopping and going to restaurants. There was one weekend when I went and I was with a big group of friends. There were too many of us, and we couldn't get a table anywhere at any of the restaurants except for Daikokuya, which at that time, I guess they hadn't been open very long, so not a lot of people knew about them. And we could all fit in there. They found us all seats at the counter. So just by luck, we went there. The ramen was tonkotsu ramen, but not quite how you would get it in like a traditional tonkotsu ramen shop in Hakata or somewhere in Kyushu like that because it had curly noodles, sort of like a Tokyo wavy style noodles. But at that time, I didn't know the difference anyway. What was important was I'd never tasted anything like it. It was I'd had ramen before, but I'd never had tonkotsu ramen, and it was so rich and so full of pork fat and had delicious chashu and it had beni shoga and all these interesting flavors, some of which I'd had before and some of which I hadn't, but none of them in that combination before. It was like I couldn't pay attention to anything else that was happening around me. I lost track of the conversation with my friends, and I was just so focused on the bowl. It was so delicious, and I went back there probably every other week or so when I was living in LA because I loved it so much. And there were other places in LA at the time, other great ramen shops, but I was very in love with Daikokuya in particular,
Mm.
and that's what made me realize eventually once I started to sort of do some research on what it was. That's when I started to realize what a phenomenon ramen is in Japan and how regional it is. And I learned about the tonkotsu and where it was from and how it was developed. And it really changed my life, to be honest, because after that, um, I was obsessed with ramen and started to find ways to shape my life around it.
Mm, right, literally. So, yeah, then what is so special about ramen and what is the essence of ramen that you love about?
On a sensory level, just in terms of how it tastes and the overall feeling of eating ramen, there's nothing quite like it. It has an impact from, first of all, being a large portion, which is, I think, important to the ramen experience. It's very filling, it's very satisfying. It's full of liquid, it's full of broth, and that makes it even more filling than I think a similar volume of different kind of food. It's full of carbs and it's got a little bit of protein and a fair bit of fat. So, like on that level, it is this very hearty kind of food, and that appeals to me. And I think a lot of people, especially I think if you grew up on like I said, I grew up eating sausages and pasta and mac and cheese. In terms of eating, obviously they taste different, but it has the same kind of level of satisfaction. It's
Mm,
got lots of umami and it's got lots of texture, and a good bowl of ramen is interesting from start to finish. But also, I mean, and if it was just that, that would be enough for me to love the dish, and a lot of people do, and it just stops there. But I think what made me really become obsessed with it was learning about the culture and the regionality of it, and realizing that everywhere you go in Japan, there is a new style to try. And even if you don't travel around Japan, I mean, if you look at the ramen scene in a city like Tokyo now, there are chefs who are doing new things with it all the time. And it's a very dynamic kind of food culture that's always changing and always incorporating new influences. And you can never get to the end of it, ramen. You can really pursue it your whole life and never run out of things to try and things to learn, and that's quite appealing to me. That means it's always exciting. No matter how much
Mm.
ramen I have, there's always new ramen to try.
Right. Well, it's interesting that when I grew up, ramen was like, casual, nothing special, okay food. When you're hungry, you just go eat and then get filled. But behind that, now looking back, everybody knew that there's something so much soul and energy and love in a bowl of ramen in very casual mom and pop places.
Yeah.
So, and people started to realize, oh, this is like a craftsmanship. And then new ramen culture arrived in Japan and, of course, abroad. So, and I heard in 2005 you were awarded a research grant to study regional noodle culture in Japan, focusing on the Shin Yokohama Ramen Museum. That's amazing.
Yeah. That was a really great opportunity. I don't remember how it came about, but it was basically I didn't have a chance to study abroad when I was in Japan or when I was in college because I had transferred to another college and then transferred back, so I missed out on that opportunity. And there was a grant that was offered to students who didn't get to go. So I was eligible for that. I applied with this proposal to go and study ramen, soba, and udon in different places and why they were established there. So there was the Shin Yokohama Ramen Museum, and then there's a soba museum in Togakushi in Nagano-ken, which I went to as well. But I wound up focusing on food museums generally because when I was there, I realized there's all these other different museums dedicated to food in Japan. So and drink. I went to Sapporo and I studied at the Sapporo Beer Museum. Also in Yokohama, there was a curry museum at the time, which is gone now. In Kyoto, there's a Wagashi Museum, and they all were fascinating to me. So that's what I wound up writing about. But the Shin Yokohama Ramen Museum really is amazing because it's more than a museum. In fact, it's almost not really a museum at all. It's almost like a ramen theme park where they have set up these ramen shops from all over the country in this area they just call Shitamachi, which is a recreation of a street from 1958, which is the year instant ramen was invented. First of all, it was an amazing opportunity to try different ramen from around the country. It's the first place I had Kumamoto ramen, which is still one of my favorites. But also, it really tells the story of ramen in a way that I think you don't get from just reading about it. For example, having it in that immersive atmosphere really conveys the sense of nostalgia and comfort and pride that is sort of found
Mm.
in ramen culture, both in terms of the people who make it and the people who eat it. It's there's a lot of talk about what is Japan's national dish, and for me, I think it has to be ramen because it's so loved. Like you said, it's such a accessible thing. It's something that everybody eats and is common, but there's also this level of craftsmanship and dedication and connection to it that I think is really
Mm.
special.
Right, right. That pride is the word. I really think you captured. I really like that. And so, after graduating from college in 2006, you moved to Kitakyushu, Japan,
Yeah.
to further your interest in Japanese cuisine. And it sounds like a major decision to move to Japan. And why did you move to Japan, and in particular Kitakyushu in Fukuoka Prefecture, which is the southern part of Japan?
Well, I applied to the JET program, and on the JET application, you're allowed to choose 3 areas where you'd like to live. You're not guaranteed to get any of them, but it's just a preference in case they could place you in one of them. And this is another situation where ramen shaped my life, is that I chose all 3 of my choices on based on their ramen. So my
Right.
first choice was actually Sapporo,
Mhm.
and I think my second choice was Yokohama, and my third was Fukuoka. And so they put me in Kitakyushu, which is, of course, in Fukuoka Prefecture, which was great. And I I really loved living in Kitakyushu. I didn't really know anything about it at the time, but of course, it had great ramen. It had all kinds of other great food. And Kyushu, generally, I got to travel around Kyushu quite a lot when I was living there. And there's so much amazing food and culture and history in Kyushu. And of course, everywhere has their own style of particular ramen. So that was very exciting for me.
Right. By the way, listeners, he was on a JET program, which is the government-sponsored teaching English to Japanese kids program.
Mm.
And I know quite a few friends that they really got their life changed because of the program. They went to Japan. You like left. You just good luck. You were really treated like king and queen. And once you get there, like goodbye, have a good day, and then you really like left alone and try to survive in a local place.
Yeah, well, I was lucky, I guess, because Kitakyushu is a big city. Kitakyushu is over 1 million people, and I think a lot of people don't really know about Kitakyushu because it's very close to Fukuoka, and people go there instead. But there's quite a big I don't know how big it is, but there was a foreigner community there was enough of us in Kitakyushu that we could help each other out, and we got support from the Board of Education, as opposed to, I had friends who lived in Sagaken in the real Inaka, and they were
Oh,
very, very much on their own, but their Japanese got much better than mine. So it's a
right.
trade-off.
Right. So, and what did you do in Kitakyushu, and how did the experience change your life?
Well, it was a working holiday, basically. I was teaching English. That was the job. But what was great about it, I mean, first of all, just being immersed in the culture and the language and being able to participate firsthand in a lot of Japanese culture, including one thing that I did that I loved was join a taiko drumming group. And I did taiko for 2 years, and I got to perform in the Kokura Gion Matsuri, which is the big matsuri in Kitakyushu, one of the big ones anyway, and made great friends that way, and had some great experiences. So just being in Kitakyushu is a really fun city. It's got great nightlife. It's got great restaurants. I really, really enjoyed living there. But my goal was to travel to every prefecture in Kyushu by the end of my 2 years there, and I did it. I only went to Oita for about an hour, so I don't know anything about Oita, but really. But that was, travel in Japan is so easy and so great. The trains are great, and domestic flights are great, and everything like that. Even the long distance buses are great. So we would go, my friends and I, or my girlfriend and I, to all the different onsen towns in Kyushu, um, and great cities. There's people know Fukuoka, and maybe Nagasaki, I think, in terms of where people go as tourists. But Kumamoto City is fantastic. Kagoshima's great. Miyazaki's great. Everywhere I went, I was seeking out the new local food, or new to me anyway, which I just loved. And Kumamoto, I gotta say, like, if I my sort of fantasy retirement, if I'm ever very rich, I'd love to have a home in Kumamoto, because I just love it there, and the food is fantastic. It's some of the best ramen in the country too.
Right. And your girlfriend became your wife, where
That's right, yeah,
you met her, right?
and that's how I wound up here, because she's British, and we decided to, yeah, make our home here in London.
Right. So here's another turn, interesting, lucky turn of your life. All right. So we'll take a quick break here. And when we come back, we'll discuss how Tim won the popular MasterChef competition with his Japanese food knowledge and skills. So please stay with us.
Today's program is brought to you by Korin, a supplier of Japanese chef knives and restaurant supplies. Korin is proud of their Japanese culture and traditions, but they want you to know that their products are not just for Japanese restaurants. Their knives and tableware bring out the best qualities of food from every culture and fit into every restaurant, from French to Pan-Asian to American. And that is why they're located in New York City, where people from every country in the world come to eat. Korin's Tribeca showroom is home to the most extensive collection of Japanese chef knives in the world, including Japan. Stop by to view their exquisitely designed tableware and the rarest natural sharpening stones. They have a whole range of knife services, from repair and rust removal to reshaping and realigning. Korin is dedicated to this ideal, bringing the highest quality Japanese design to your table so you can experience the unparalleled quality of Japanese craftsmanship in your home or restaurant. For more information, visit Korin.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to Japan Eats on the Heritage Radio Network, HRN. I'm your host, Aki Katayama. My guest today is Tim Anderson, who is a chef, food writer, and broadcaster based in London. So, after the completion of the JET program, you moved to the UK for the reason we just discussed. And in 2011, you competed on a popular TV program, MasterChef on BBC One, and won the competition. So, what did you cook on the show? And why did you think you won the competition?
I cooked a lot of different unusual things, to be honest. I went into the competition thinking I would be mostly cooking Japanese food because that's what I was most comfortable cooking.
Oh, by the way, you just applied for like, oh, that looks like a fun. Let's do it.
Oh, yeah. So I moved here in 2008 and I started watching MasterChef on TV. It's a very popular show, so I came and I love cooking shows, so I started watching it right away, basically. I watched 2 seasons. After 2 years, I thought I would apply just because there's nothing you don't risk anything by applying. So I filled out a form online, and then there's an interview process and an audition process, and then you're on the show. So I didn't have any expectations. I didn't have any great ambitions, but I figured when I was on the show, I should at least do my best, obviously. I'm not really a competitive person, but if somebody tells me to do something, I will do it. I went into it thinking I would be cooking Japanese food mostly. A lot of the challenges on MasterChef have to do with using ingredients that they have in the studio or on site at the challenge, and then making something out of those ingredients on the fly. They didn't usually have any Japanese ingredients or ever. So I was used to cooking with things like dashi and soy sauce and miso, and without those things, I had to change what I cooked.
Mm.
So I I started to cook a little bit more. It's hard to describe, but I suppose the best comparison I can make is a bit more like David Chang, which is
Mm.
fusion. And that was partly because, again, I was limited by ingredients, or maybe limited is the wrong word, but I was prompted to cook differently by having different ingredients to hand. But it was also because that was, I think, more interesting to the judges. And it is Japanese food is it's often so simple that it's hard. They expect a different style on that show, and the kind of Japanese food that I love, like ramen, like things like okonomiyaki or tempura or karaage. This was all. I guess it's sort of. I've always been more into sort of the BQ gurume side of Japanese food, and they expect more fine dining, I suppose. But by the end, the challenges were more based on recipes that I created, and I could bring in my own ingredients rather than having to rely on the ones in the studio. Then I was able to um, do more Japanese food, including ramen, which I did in the final. And by the final, I really didn't expect to win because I'd made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I thought that the other contestants had a better shot. And so again, making ramen, I suppose, is another thing that I thought, well, this probably isn't going to be fine dining enough for MasterChef, but it was true to what I love and what I know. And I didn't think I would win anyway, so I just thought, well, I'm just going to make ramen. and and then at least I probably won't win anyway, but at least I'll have done my best and cooked in a way that was true to myself. So and then I won, surprisingly. So it must have been a good bowl of ramen.
Right.
It drew on other things because in the final on MasterChef, you do a starter, a main, and a dessert, and I sort of told my story through those dishes. And the starter was burgers. I made 3 sliders basically, and then the main was ramen, and then the dessert was I did British desserts. So it wasn't all Japanese, but there was ramen, and that's appropriate because ramen has always been there for me, and it's always seems to have um, influenced big life changes, I suppose, for
Right.
me.
And I heard also with ramen, you served with truffled lobster gyoza. Is that what it
That's
is?
right. And
Right.
again, this is one of these chefy fine dining things that I think I Could I have won with just pork gyoza? Maybe. I don't know. Again, it's I'm not the judge on that show, and they have different standards. But I thought, well, if I am gonna do this, I may as well go for it, and I may as well put lobster and truffles in my gyoza because I don't know if I'll ever have the opportunity to cook something like that again.
Right. That was a successful twist, I can say. I can eat that for sure. So, and then after all those amazing winning and your mental training, you opened your first ramen shop in 2015 and the second one in 2019, both in London, and eventually left the business in 2021. So, how was your experience running ramen shops as a chef owner, and what was your takeaway?
Well, the restaurant was always a challenge, and any restaurant owner will tell you that, to say the least. But I think that the main problem for me looking back on it was that it was too large of a space to make ramen. And we had a sort of full izakaya menu in addition to the ramen there. Originally, I called it a menshuka, sort of a ramen drinking house.
Mm.
But we had about 80 covers to start, and after a few years we expanded to have about 115. And it was over 2 floors, and so it was very, very hard to get the ramen out in a way that was efficient and kept the quality up. So there was always a struggle making ramen to the standard that I wanted to make it while also uh, feeding that many people at once, basically. And ramen shops in Japan, there are bigger ones, but most of them are smaller operations where you're sat at a counter and served directly as soon as the ramen's done, rather than having it brought to a table or up some stairs. And not with a lot of other things on the menu. Sometimes basically nothing else on the menu. You might get a bowl of rice or some gyoza, maybe some karage, but it's usually you just get ramen. And that's why those places, the ramen shops in Japan are able to be so good because they specialize and they focus. And that's very hard to do in London in general because the restaurants are just they're set up differently. The rents are higher, and customers expect more variety. I think that's changing a little bit now. And if I were to open another place, and I may someday, although I'm quite happy writing cookbooks for the moment. I would try to do it more like how it's done in Japan with a smaller place, a more limited menu, and in a way that I have more control over the product and the service. But like I said, I don't know if I'll ever do that because that's just the food. The food is its own challenge, but running a restaurant has so many other challenges that are basically unrelated to it. And a huge problem for me, or huge challenge, was staffing. Um, it was always hard to find staff, to keep staff, and to pay them what I thought was fair, while also keeping the prices down on the menu. Because ramen I think should be a cheap food. I think that's part of the ethos of ramen. But if you try to make it cheap, then you end up with no money to spend. You have no money to pay your staff or to pay your rent. So I think I would be more fearless in terms of pricing as well. If I were to do it again, I would sell ramen uh, for a lot more money, and not be greedy, but just to charge what it actually costs to produce while paying everybody fairly. That would be, and that is very difficult. So this is a huge obstacle to overcome if I were to ever open another place. But someday the stars might align, and if I can find a place where the rent's not too high, I would like to. But it would have to be a very specific financial situation that would allow this.
Right. Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, I've seen great examples of in Tokyo and in throughout Japan. There are like one person operation restaurants, like really like
Mm.
high end, but everything is in control. You can be sick, but you have full control. The minimum cost of labor, anything else, and I think they're having fun. So your passion for ramen probably drives you to that direction. I'd imagine, but we'll see. Right. So now you are very successful author of 8 books about Japanese food and the
Mm.
culture behind it. And the titles cover ramen, of course, but also various topics far beyond ramen, such as izakaya food, vegan, Japanese, and highly regional Hokkaido cuisine, and 8 books. So could you tell us about your books and why did you choose each title?
Well, the the funny thing is that I didn't really choose most of them. I was uh, it's always been a dialogue basically between me and my editor. In fact, there have been a number of books where I have pitched something and then they came back and said, "We don't want that, but can you do this?" And so I said, "Okay." So
Mm.
my first book was Nanban, and that's about food from Kyushu. And then after that, I went back and I pitched something completely different. I can't even remember what it was now, but they said, "We don't really want that. Can you do an easy Japanese book?" And that's how Japanesey came about. Um, and then for a while, most of the books were my publisher's idea. They wanted Japanesey. The vegan Japanesey was their idea. Tokyo Stories was their idea. The Izakaya book was kind of came about through a mutual discussion. And then there was the third Japanesey bowls and bento that was also came from them. And it wasn't until Hokkaido really that I was writing the book that I pitched. And this is not to say I didn't want to write the other books. I think I was very happy to write them. Um, I think that the reason I've been able to keep this, or one of the reasons I've been able to do this as a career for so long and do so many books is because I just said yes, basically, instead of trying to push, because I have lots of ideas for books that they just say no to, and it's a little bit it's very disappointing sometimes. But I like doing it so much generally that I don't mind working on their concepts, especially if then it leads to a book like Ramen Forever or Hokkaido, which are real passions of mine, and I obviously have a lot to say about those topics, and I love to do them. There's a lot of cookbooks out there. Like it's kind of a boom time for cookbook publishing generally. And the sad truth is that a lot of them, the majority of them that get published, they just don't sell very well. And that's really heartbreaking because people work really hard on these books. I know a lot of other cookbook authors. It's not just about what I want to do all the time because I have a certain respect for the commercial aspect of it too. And if the publisher says, "Well, we don't want to do that book because we don't think it sells," that's hard to hear sometimes, but it's also, they know what they're talking about, and nobody wants to work on a book full time for a year and then have nobody read it. That's very sad. So it's a back and forth, I suppose, is what I'm saying, and that's how I've been able to do it.
Right. Well, but nowadays, especially any information, including AI, is available, and you
Mhm.
can tell what is reliable. And your books are very, very much based on who you are, your experience, and deep, deep thoughts, and the passion for it. So, yeah, and I just want to dig into a couple books you wrote. So, first, Nanban. Nanban is a pretty common concept among Japanese people's mind, but not many people know outside Japan. So what is Nanban and what's the essence of Nanban?
So Nanban means southern barbarian, and it's what the Japanese called Europeans when they first arrived in Japan, since they came by the south. They were trading in the Spice Islands and arrived in Kyushu first. And I thought this was obviously people don't call Europeans barbarians anymore. So I thought it was quite a funny thing that even though people don't use it in Japan that way, it still appears in food. So chicken namban from Miyazaki or nambanzuke, so there's a remnant of this influence that always intrigued me. Just expanding on that, this idea of a foreign influence in Japanese food, I think, is really, really interesting. And you see that a lot in the food of Kyushu, I think, particularly because it was a site of trade and migration for so long. So there's nambanzuke, there's chicken namban, but there's all kinds of other dishes in Kyushu that have this very strong foreign influence. So ramen, of course, was originally from China, and champon, which is similar. And you get things like castella, and even tempura itself, these were Portuguese originally, and nambanzuke. And then you get more modern influences from, say, America, like the Sasebo burger, which is from Sasebo in Nagasaki because there's an American Navy base there, and mentaiko, which is everybody knows mentaiko is from Hakata, but originally it was from Korea. So that is very interesting to me, and I think that especially after I moved to the UK, everybody the image of Japanese food is that it's very closed off and very like it hasn't changed in thousands of years or something. So I focused on that, not necessarily just Kyushu, but mostly Kyushu and a little bit from Okinawa. I focused on those foods to illustrate no, there's a lot of exchange in Japanese food and a lot of influence, and that's what is interesting to me.
I'm so glad you wrote this book, and I haven't bought it yet, but I will because there's so much going on, and
Thanks.
it's a delicious genre of food. So, all right, and also, you mentioned Hokkaido.
Mm,
So it's a kind of mysterious place, and used to be called Gaichimi, like outside of the mainland, like a
yeah,
very discriminating term up until like a couple centuries ago.
yeah.
And but it's a rich in culture, history. Do you want to talk about why you wanted to write the book, and also what's the essence of Hokkaido book?
Yeah, Hokkaido is a very special place, and it was a very special book for me because I went to Hokkaido on my research trip back in 2005 or 2004, uh, and I went to Sapporo, and I focused mainly on the beer museum there and the history of brewing. But I realized when I was there that it had all these similarities uh, in terms of the food and the history to Wisconsin, where I'm from. So, and to give an example, if you go to a beer hall or a restaurant in Hokkaido, you're likely to find things like venison and sausages and cheese and German potato salad, and these are the exact kinds of things that we had in Wisconsin. And beer, we're very much known for beer and cheese in Wisconsin. So it was always very interesting to me, and I went back just on holiday a couple of years after that, and I never got to go again. And I was pitching this book because I thought there's something very interesting about Hokkaido to me, and I would love to go and spend more time and do proper research there. And then this, coming back to the publisher, sort of doing work on their concepts for years. After three or four of those, I said, "How about Hokkaido?" And they said yes, and I thought, "Great." And then I couldn't go because it was the pandemic.
Whoa.
But eventually, finally, I was able to get a visa to go there, and then it opened up completely. Um, and I traveled all over the island. I didn't see all of it, of course. It's very big, but I followed the food, and I went to some of the major other. I went to Sapporo, of course, and I went to Hakodate and Asahikawa, but also some of the mid-sized cities like Abashiri and Kushiro and Obihiro, and went to Wakanai, which was sort of a life dream to go to the northernmost point of Japan. And just like Kyushu, finding all these interesting local specialties, some of which don't work in a cookbook for for the British market or the American market because they're very much based on the ingredients that are specific to Hokkaido. Um, and some Hokkaido dishes are very, very simple, but they rely on good produce. So like kaisendon, there is a recipe for kaisendon in the book, but you don't necessarily get the same quality of uni or scallops or things like that. So I just say in the book, like the spirit of this is get the best seafood you can, and then here's how to put it together. But there is there's so much in terms of the again, Hokkaido is another place that really has influences from other cultures. So you obviously have traditional Japanese food there, but you also have this very strong history of Western food, and you see that in the dairy, the milk, butter, cheese, all this stuff, ice cream, the fruit farming, corn and potatoes and things like that, as well as game and meat. There's Genghis Khan and lots of venison cookery. And then you have the Ainu side, the Ainu food culture, which is really it's very very distinctive from Japanese food and really hyper local in terms of the ingredients that are used.
Right. So the listeners who are not familiar with the Ainu are the indigenous ethnic group who
Yes.
resides in northern Japan, including Hokkaido. So they have really like native, precious roots. And then because we are becoming more aware, everybody on earth started to be more conscious of what to preserve, what
Yes.
we should not lose. So I knew it's gaining attention, not enough, but yeah, you're featuring in your book. So yeah, I have
Yeah.
eaten good, but must be really great.
Well, it's interesting because when I first went there, there was in Sapporo really only one Ainu restaurant, which I can't remember the name of now. And then when I went back 2 years later, it was shut. It was already gone. It was a family-run place. And then there weren't very many places you could try Ainu food in Sapporo or in Hokkaido generally. But they've had a bit of a cultural revival, and now there's more restaurants, and there's more places where you can learn about it, including the National Ainu Museum, Upapoi, uh, which offers cooking classes in addition to all their amazing displays. And I really recommend people go there and try to get into a cooking class if you can, because the cooking is simple, but it's really fascinating, especially because of some of the ingredients and techniques used are very different from Japanese food.
Right. And now, after writing so many books in depth, and also your travel brand lived in many places, so you have a very deep and broad perspective of on Japanese food and the culture behind it. So, having lived in the U.S., U.K., and Japan, and all those knowledge and skills, why do you think Japanese food is special, like so shared so much globally right now? Because like you said, Japanese food can be very regional, but it's
Mm.
somehow popular globally. Why is that?
It's a very tough question to answer. I wish I had a simple answer. um, but I think that there's a few things. One is the inherent deliciousness, and I think I think umami has a lot to do with this. And if you look at other cuisines that have become popular all over the world, they're very good at naturally delivering umami. And so Italian food, which has tomatoes and cheese and anchovies and things like that. That's very, very savory, very, very easy for people to love, and it has that sort of deep savory taste. I think Chinese food is similar, and I think Japanese food is obviously very, very good at it. So these seasonings like soy sauce, like miso, like dashi, that give you a really strong umami flavor, I think that's very irresistible to a lot of people around the world. So that's part of it, just the pure flavor, the taste of it. But I also think that it's partly political in the sense that Japan is a friendly country to many people, many countries all over the world, to most countries. It's there's not what Japan has conflicts with some countries, but for the most part, it's an economic partner and a political partner, and a cultural partner that everybody is already amenable to. And I think that you know we could the food isn't you can't isolate it from the pop culture and the culture as well. So some people, they may become interested in Japan because of anime or video games or tea culture or ceramics or art or all these other elements of Japanese culture that are appealing to people all over the world. And then from there, they can learn about the food and discover that they love that as well. So I think that's part of it. And of course, the Japanese government's very good at promoting Japanese culture and Japanese food abroad. But I think that there's other things that I can't quite pin down that are kind of special to Japanese culture. And you hear words like that come up that kind of explain a little bit things like kaizen, sort of continuous self improvement,
Right.
or kodawari, this sort of obsession with detail and being particular about things, or ikigai, this idea of having a kind of finding a life's purpose in your work. uh, all of these ideas I think are useful to understand like what makes Japanese food special and popular, because I think there is a really strong culture for craft and caring about one's work, um, in Japan, that obviously you can see in things like the shokunin culture, these kind of master craftspeople in Japan. But even it applies to situations where you might not expect it. Like I always think about konbini in Japan, which are in most countries, convenience stores are not a place to get nice food. But in Japan, the food is very, very good, and it's always fresh and it's always well made, and I think that's because these cultural values apply even to situations like that, where there are people within the business of convenience stores where they're thinking, okay, how can we make this better? How can we make this the best for the customer? How can we improve? How do we make it consistent? That you don't get in, say, a convenience store culture, or a fast food culture here in the UK or in America. Um, so it's not just one thing. I think it's many things that support this kind of special, unique Japanese food culture. And frankly, I think that I wish we had more of that here in the UK. I wish we had a little bit more attention to detail, a little bit more care in terms of what we do, because it makes things better for everybody.
That's interesting. That's very insightful. I think think of we have Japanese people have very strong awe to nature, and we have to
Mm,
stay humble because we're tiny existence, and you are surrounded by like 8 million gods, and you have to be
right.
respectful. Like seriously. And when I
Yeah.
grew up, like the one grain it has a god, you can't live in the bowl, so I had to finish every single grain of rice in my bowl,
Yeah.
and yeah, and then also I think even if you are the master of master, you have to stay humble. You're forever students. You never call yourself master. And people say master, we go, oh, thank you so much, but I'm not enough to be. That's the mindset, right? Because
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
are, yeah. So otherwise, you just stop and then get satisfied, which stops the Kaizen mindset. And yeah, it's interesting that you said that. And the convenience stores, I heard this is like a battleground. I think over 15,000 items go through each shop to
Wow.
sort out what sells, what doesn't, and then it's like so many new items. This seasonal
Yeah.
sweet and this couple weeks only. And it's a very serious business, and I'm fascinated by it.
It's
Yeah.
amazing, and it's regional too. What you get at convenience stores in Fukuoka is different from what they have in Hokkaido, which is different from what you get in Okinawa, and it's amazing that even where you least expect that kind of regionality, even in a convenience store, it exists.
Right. And then that's like your coffee shop, right? You have your favorite convenience store, and you can't live without kind of like,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But knowing now you are really, you know deeply about Japanese culture, and your mindset seems to be almost, I don't know where you belong to, but what's in your mind, what is special about Japanese food culture or food to you personally at this point of your life?
I think it comes down to pride. And when you talk about having pride in your where you're from, that could often has kind of negative connotations and a negative impact. But I think they do it well in Japan, in the sense that they want to share. Like, this is not universally, but whenever I've traveled throughout Japan, it's not just that the local food or the special food exists, it's that people are really proud of it and they've worked hard on it, and they know they have something special and they want other people to experience it. And that's another thing that I wish we had more of here, in the UK, because and it's all connected to sort of like, there's an element of tourism and sort of omiyage culture in this, that makes it helps everybody, because if you travel from place to place here in the UK, it's very hard to find something interesting, something really local to buy or to eat, and that doesn't give any incentive to the people traveling there to buy anything in particular. So, and that's just the commercial side, but I think that there's real joy in taking pride in what you're doing, and then also in sharing with other people, and you see that all over Japan. And um I think that's quite special.
Mm, interesting. So maybe you can write a book one day about your spiritual part, and I will definitely buy it. I'll be the first
Mm.
buyer of the book.
Yeah, the joy of omiyage is what I'll call it.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of things yeah, it's like the packaging also reflects how
Yes,
people want to take care of others as like a surprise gift, and it's crazy. Each like Japanese gift shop, like department store food items,
absolutely.
they're packed like in a jewel box. So
Yeah,
that's
even
interesting.
even the ekiben, some of
Mm.
these local bento are just beautiful, and they're fresh and so well made. And it's I can't even think about that happening here without laughing, because everything here is just a sandwich in a plastic box. Like it's a completely different culture in a way. I wish we could have nice things sometimes. That's what Japan has.
Interesting, right? That's the whole package of the society, right? The mindset. And also, I think
Even
when I go to Britain, I really like that culture and also like pub culture. That's
yeah.
something the package of this community. But I'm glad you um accidentally, chose to study Japanese and then you found food and then eventually you're there really introducing Japanese culture to the world. And I'm learning a lot from you today. So yeah, amazing.
My
So
pleasure. It's a privilege. It's a privilege.
I hope you're gonna keep writing books and including that bento gift and convenience store, maybe, the spiritual side, and you have like 4 other books already in your mind. I'm hoping.
It's I'll take it to my publisher. Yeah, it's not a bad
Right.
idea.
Yeah, and related to that, you have taken many expected and lucky turns in your life so far. So, what are your plans and dreams in addition to writing more books?
I could keep writing about Japan until I die. It never stops being interesting to me. But I would also. It's been 2 decades since I lived in America, almost, where I'm from, and so I'm starting to get more interested in America as a foreign country, because it's starting to feel quite foreign to me in a lot of ways. So I would love to write more about America and kind of food and culture I grew up with as well, because I suppose I'm at an age too where I'm feeling nostalgic for that food. And it's also Japan now. Japanese food has become, there's still a lot of people don't understand, but it's become very, very well known. And so as a cookbook author, it becomes harder and harder to find things to put in a cookbook, basically, because I've written a lot, other people have written a lot. Switching over to cover America for a book or two, I think would be fascinating. But then I'll always return to Japan, of course.
Well, the good thing is you have a very comparative view. So when you look at America, you can have deeper insight, even, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, having lived in the UK for so long and having lived in Japan and studied Japan, it does make it makes the differences stand out. And whether they're good or bad, it helps you understand sometimes different cultures by comparison.
Right. Interesting. All right. So hopefully we'll come back and discuss more about, what's happening with you because you have such a um, great reservoir in your mind about Japan. Yeah. So where can we find your updates online and on social media?
I am Chef Tim Anderson on Instagram, and I also have a Substack called 24-Hour Pancake People. And that is about American food, but I can't help myself. I have written about Japanese food as well there. So
There you go. All right. So thank you so much for joining us today, Tim.
thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Right, listeners, if you have any questions or comments about the show or suggestions for show topics or guests, please contact us at japaneats@heritageradionetwork.org or kikotema.com. Japan Eats is a weekly program and is always available at heritageradionetwork.org as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify as a podcast. Our engineer is Gabriel Jane. Thanks for listening. I will see you next week.